Here, S where it gets uncomfortable. The number doesn't lie about what it measures. It's just half the story. And when you base a national sunscreen culture on half the story, you get what we have. Millions of people buying math that prevents a burn today while letting tomorrow's damage through. To understand who tried to fix the blind spot first and why American shelves still lag, we need to leave the beach and step into two different regulatory worlds. One chose speed and new filters. One chose caution and a label that stayed loud about the wrong thing. The UVA problem. The rays you don't feel. To see why the big number misleads, we have to meet the part of sunlight you don't feel. UVB is the match that burns. UVA is the quiet floodlight. It makes up the vast majority of UV that reaches you, slides deeper into the dermis, and doesn't announce itself with sting. No alarm, no pink, no short-term feedback loop. Just slow cellular stress that shows up years later as lines, spots, and in some cases, cancer. Here's the human version. A truck driver in his 60s walks into a dermatologist's office. One side of his face looks 10 years older, leathery, mottled, creased. The other side, the one away from the window, looks younger. He never felt a burn behind glass, but UVA had been clocking hours through that windshield for decades. Glass knocks down UVB. UVA gets through quietly. What's happening under the hood is messy and relentless. UVA's longer wavelengths bypass the epidermis's early warning system and dump energy into the dermis. There, it stirs up reactive oxygen species that nick collagen, break elastin's recoil, and interfere with the enzymes that keep your skin architecture tidy. It also creates indirect DNA damage. Instead of a single, obvious mutation event, you get oxidative chaos and repair errors that add up. It doesn't look dramatic in a day. It compounds across summers, commutes, and office windows. Clouds don't help much. The light outside goes gray, the temperature drops, you feel safe, UVA barely notices. It penetrates haze, bounces around, and still lands. That's why dermatologists talk about daily sunscreen like brushing your teeth. Not because you're planning a beach day, but because Tuesday has windows. Office glass, car glass, airplane windows, UVA likes them all. If your protection strategy starts when you feel heat, you're starting late. So what does broad spectrum really mean? In the US, it means a product meets a minimum requirement that its UVA protection reaches a certain fraction of its UVB protection. It's a bar, not a grade. Hit it and you get to print the badge. Miss it and you don't. But here's the catch. That threshold doesn't climb in lockstep with the giant SPF on the front. A high SPF product can legally carry modest UVA coverage and still say broad spectrum. The label doesn't tell you how strong that UVA shield actually is. That's the false comfort problem. You buy SPF 70, wear it carefully, and notice you're not burning. So you stay. You don't reapply on time. You trust the number. Meanwhile, the UVA portion of the formula might be working at a lower ceiling than you think, especially if the brand leaned on UVB-strong filters to win that big digit. The result? Low pain now, higher dose of the quiet stuff later. If you've shopped abroad, you've seen a different story on the label. In Japan and Korea, a PA system, plus signs, speaks specifically to UVA performance. Europe often uses PPD numbers or UVA circles to show a defined ratio and a minimum. Those systems push manufacturers to prove and display real UVA heft. In practice, that alignment of test and label changed what people bought and how they used it. Elegant textures helped, but so did knowing a product was PA++++ instead of just broad spectrum. Texture matters more than we admit. Strong UVA filters can be oily or heavy if the chemistry is old. People skip heavy products, they underapply. They forget the midday re-up because the film feels smothering. Modern UVA filters abroad let formulators build thinner, more stable films that people actually enjoy. Compliance isn't a moral issue, it's a friction problem. The easier it feels, the more you use it, the safer you are. There's another quirk. UVA breaks some filters down. Avobenzone, a common US UVA absorber, needs stabilizers or it photodegrades. Good formulas pair it with helpers, but not all do that well. Mineral zinc oxide is a true broad-spectrum workhorse, but at useful loads, it can leave a cast that keeps people from using enough. These trade-offs live in the gap between what a label promises and what daily life delivers. And then there's hyperpigmentation. For darker skin tones or anyone managing melasma or post-inflammatory marks, UVA is a relentless aggravator. You might never burn, so SPF feels irrelevant. But UVA stirs melanocytes and locks in contrast you're trying to fade. That's why dermatologists tell patients with pigment concerns to chase high UVA ratings, hats, and shade like their routine depends on it, because it does. Let's bring this back to the kitchen counter. You've got two bottles. One screams SPF 60 with broad spectrum in small print. The other from abroad says SPF 50 PA++++. The first could be fine. It could also be UVB heavy with bare minimum UVA coverage. The second is telling you its UVA armor is robust. Without that clarity, American shoppers are guessing. Many guess wrong. The stakes aren't theoretical. Skin cancers show up most where life puts light: faces, ears, necks, forearms. UVA is there every overcast commute, every corner desk. When the standard teaches you to celebrate a number you can feel while sidelining a wavelength you can't, you get more hours outside, less reapplication, and a quiet ledger of damage adding up. We can fix this. Labels that grade UVA plainly help. Formulas people like help more, but step one is seeing the problem. The rays you don't feel are the ones you live in. And once you see them, the rest of the story, how different regions responded, makes sense. Two worlds of sunscreen. US versus the EU and Asia. While that was happening in American bathrooms, bigger numbers, small UVA promises, something different was taking shape in Paris labs and Tokyo pharmacies. Walk into a European drugstore and the shelf reads like a chemistry upgrade. More filters to choose from, more ways to block the long wavelengths we actually live in, and formulas that feel like skincare, not paste. Here's the split in plain terms. The US has a limited roster of UV filters, roughly a dozen and change you actually see, most of them older. Europe and parts of Asia approve 30+ options, including modern UVA specialists. That broader toolkit lets formulators build protection like a balanced diet, not a two-food menu. If you want strong coverage beyond 370 nanometers, they've got molecules designed for it. If you want stability under brutal sun, they've got workhorses that don't fall apart at noon. Names matter here because they changed behavior. Abroad, you'll see filters like Tinosorb S and Tinosorb M, bisethylhexyloxyphenyl methoxyphenyl triazine, and its hybrid particulate cousin. They absorb a wide swath and don't quit quickly. Uvinol A+, diethylamino hydroxybenzyl hexyl benzoate, was built to catch deep UVA with good photo stability. Add Mexoryl SX and Mexoryl 400, tuned to the far end of UVA, and you start closing the gap the human eye can't sense. Those aren't buzzwords. They're the tools that make a label's UVA claims hold up on real skin day after day. Meanwhile, in the US, formulators often lean on avobenzone for UVA, then prop it up so it doesn't crumble under light, while piling on UVB-strong filters to hit high SPF. Zinc oxide can cover both sides, but at levels that really matter, it can leave a cast many people won't tolerate. That's the quiet compliance penalty. If a product looks chalky or feels greasy, people underapply or skip the second coat. Elegant chemistry isn't about luxury. It's about getting the right dose on faces that would otherwise resist it. Why did the shelves diverge? The rulebook. America treats sunscreen as an over-the-counter drug, which puts every active ingredient through a slow, formal gauntlet. Europe and much of Asia regulate sunscreen as cosmetics, different frameworks, different speeds. In the US, the 1999 monograph defined the sandbox, and for years it barely expanded. Abroad, regulators allowed newer molecules with solid dossiers, and formulators iterated. You can hear the groan in American labs. They know the filters. They just can't use them here without a long fight. What nobody knew in those early years was how much texture would decide outcomes. A thin, fast-setting milk with modern filters vanishes on the skin. People use enough and they reapply because it feels fine under makeup or sweat. A thick, draggy cream with older actives may protect on paper, but if you spread half the dose because it pills or shines, your real-world shield is weak. That's why European lunch crowds apply a nickel-sized puddle without flinching, and why Korean commuters pat PA+++ gels like moisturizer. It's not discipline, it's friction reduced. There's a second, subtler difference. Labeling that speaks to UVA. European products often include a UVA logo indicating a defined ratio to SPF, and many list PPD values that approximate how much UVA gets through. Japanese and Korean labels use PA grades, pluses that track increasing UVA performance. That language trains shoppers to think beyond the front number and pick formulas with proven depth. In the US, broad spectrum is a binary gate. You pass or you don't. It doesn't push formulas to keep climbing with the SPF claim. So a bottle can tout 70 on the front and offer only modest UVA robustness, and the shopper has no way to see it. Here's a micro story from a Paris pharmacy. A mother asks for something for melasma. The pharmacist pulls a lightweight fluid, SPF 50 with a high PPD and long UVA coverage, tells her it won't ghost on darker skin, and shows her the two-finger line for daily use. She leaves with a plan she'll actually follow. Across the Atlantic, a similar mother scans a US aisle, finds broad-spectrum SPF 70, worries about white cast, and buys a tinted moisturizer with SPF 20 because it looks nicer under makeup. One system nudges toward adherence, the other nudges toward compromise. Unknown to most shoppers, those modern filters abroad also simplify formulation math. When your active doesn't photodegrade fast, you need fewer stabilizers, which can mean fewer irritants and less weight. When a filter targets the tail of UVA, you don't have to overload a UVB workhorse to compensate. The result? Thinner films that still hold up on a long run, fewer stinging eyes, less fragrance needed to mask heavy bases. That's compliance again, but engineered. The irony is hard to miss. American dermatologists spend clinic time coaching patients around a label that doesn't show them the metric that matters, while European and Asian shelves quietly teach it at the point of sale. It isn't that the US can't make good sunscreen. It's that the rulebook and the chemistry toolkit make it harder to build great ones people love. Everything was about to change when the gatekeepers were forced to revisit their standards. But before that door budged, cracks had already appeared in the American story. Contamination scares, absorption questions, and a market trained to chase the biggest number on the shelf. The regulatory stall. Why the FDA moves like wet cement. While European shelves filled with new filters, the American gate stayed heavy. Here, SY. In the US, sunscreen isn't just skincare, it's an over-the-counter drug. That means every active filter lives inside a formal rulebook called a monograph. In 1999, the FDA published its sunscreen monograph and, in effect, froze the playbook. If your formula used the listed actives at approved concentrations and passed required tests, you could sell it without filing a full new drug application. If you wanted a new filter, different story. You'd be asking to expand the monograph or go the prescription route, neither fast. The system was built for caution. You establish what's generally recognized as safe and effective, then you hold the line. But the line didn't move. Throughout the 2000s, industry groups petitioned for modern filters used abroad. The queue grew. The FDA, stung by unrelated drug safety scandals, slowed further, demanding more data on chronic exposure, phototoxicity, and systemic absorption. In 2014, Congress tried to pry the door open with the Sunscreen Innovation Act, setting timelines for FDA decisions on new actives. The deadlines came and went. The agency asked for more safety evidence. Meanwhile, the 1999 framework stayed the daily reality on store shelves. Inside the bureaucracy, there was a logic to the pace. Unlike cosmetics, OTC drugs are judged against a higher bar. The FDA wanted to see what long-term daily whole-body application meant in real people, not just in Petri dishes. Then the agency ran its own maximum usage trials and found what formulators suspected. Several common US filters hit measurable levels in blood under heavy use. The FDA didn't say, "Stop using sunscreen." It said, in essence, "Prove this level of exposure is safe." That's not a ban. It's a homework assignment that takes years, and it applied retroactively to older filters too. Industry had mixed incentives. The incumbents already had a menu of approved actives and profitable products. A new UVA superstar from Europe might force reformulation, new stability data, new packaging, and price pressure. If the rules stayed familiar, margins stayed safe. Lobbyists argued for clarity and speed. They didn't always push for upheaval. Consumers, trained by marketing to chase the biggest SPF, didn't know what they were missing. The market could grow without the toolkit evolving. There's another wrinkle: how labels were modernized. Broad spectrum eventually arrived as a binary pass-fail tied to a UVA to UVB ratio, and water resistance claims got time limits. But the front-of-pack story never required a plain UVA rating. Without that metric, there was little regulatory pressure for UVA protection to climb in lockstep with rising SPF claim. Brands could keep leaning on UVB-strong filters to win the big number, satisfy the minimal UVA bar, and hit the shelf with 70 or 100 in bold. On paper, reforms kept coming. The CARES Act in 2020 overhauled the old monograph rulemaking into an administrative order process meant to be faster. In practice, the FDA also proposed tightening safety determinations. Of the 16 US-listed actives, only zinc oxide and titanium dioxide were clearly GRASC. Others needed more data. That's a careful position, but it landed like a freeze frame. If the old filters needed homework and new filters needed doors opened, formulators were trapped between a past that wasn't fully settled and a future that wasn't yet allowed. Meanwhile, abroad, post-market surveillance and cosmetic regulation let regulators update guidance without locking every active into a separate drug channel. That doesn't mean lax. Europe bans ingredients quickly when risk is clear. It does mean faster incorporation of modern UVA chemistry. American dermatologists watch their patients import tubes, compare textures on forums, and ask why their favorite PA++++ gel wasn't legally sold stateside. The answer was never simple. Different laws, different thresholds, different risk calculus. Here's a micro story from a New Jersey lab bench. A formulator runs 2 prototypes. Version A, avobenzone stabilized within the US playbook, high-SPF passable feel. Version B, a modern UVA filter stack they can't legally market here without a new order. In blind panels, people prefer B. It spreads faster, stings less, and holds up in sweat. The team tags it EU only, ships samples to partners overseas, and spends the afternoon rewriting version A to be less greasy. The science exists. The gate is the constraint. All of this had a human cost you couldn't feel day one. American shoppers conflated drug-level regulation with best-in-class protection, then bought on a number that favored UVB. Outdoor workers trusted a system that didn't speak plainly about UVA strength. People with deeper skin tones, already hesitant about white cast, were offered thicker mineral creams or older chemical blends, many underapplied. The stall wasn't just bureaucratic. It was behavioral, retail, cultural. While the cement slowly set, warning signs bubbled up, absorption data, benzene recalls, label over claims. These didn't prove sunscreen was dangerous. They proved the system needed agility and oversight. But agility requires a gate that can swing. And as long as the rulebook favored yesterday's actives, the market kept selling big digits to cover a gap the label wouldn't name. The chemical question, what's getting into your blood? While the gate stayed closed, something unsettling surfaced in the lab. Under heavy, real-world use, some common US sunscreen filters don't just sit on your skin, they show up in blood tests. This isn't rumor. In 2019 and 2020, FDA-sponsored maximum usage trials measured plasma levels after people applied sunscreen across much of their bodies several times a day, as labels recommend. The results were clear. Avobenzone, oxybenzone, octocrylene, homosalate, octizalate, and octinoxate all crossed the agency's 0.5 ng/ml threshold that triggers a request for more safety data. Stakes first, because this is where people panic. Finding a chemical in blood isn't the same as proving harm. The FDA didn't tell anyone to stop using sunscreen. They said, at these exposure levels, we want toxicology answers we don't fully have on endocrine activity, on chronic exposure, on vulnerable groups. That's a homework list, not a verdict. Dermatologists still recommend daily sunscreen because the risk of UV damage is certain. But the fact that these molecules get in means we should demand formulas and filters with better safety dossiers, not shrug what actually happened in those studies. Volunteers were assigned lotions, creams, or sprays and applied the standard dose to most of their bodies on day one, then reapplied at regular intervals for several days. Blood samples taken over time showed geometric mean concentrations of several actives well above that 0.5 ng/ml signal. Oxybenzone spiked the highest. Avobenzone and octocrylene were lower but measurable. Homosalate and octizalate also crossed the bar. The takeaway wasn't toxic, it was systemic. And once an ingredient is systemic, regulators ask, what does long-term, low-level exposure do? Does it matter for teens, for pregnancy, for thyroid function? Those are fair questions.